Afternoon, everyone. My name is Donald Hedgermichael and I'm from the National Liberal Club's Defence and Security Circle. My thanks for you taking the time to participate this afternoon. Some of you are overseas, but most of you are from the United Kingdom. Tonight we've got Lynn O'Donnell, author and war correspondent, war reporter, interviewing Commander Kay Hallsworth, Royal Navy, on an important topic, which is something that everyone interested in the defence area needs to get a better handle on. It's about what happens to those who have served after their end of service. We are recording. The recording will be available in about 2 days' time on the National Liberal Club's YouTube channel. And if you have any questions, using the chat function, you can send your questions and literally show your interest to Sina, who will be managing the Q&A. And the Q&A session will be in the second half of our 1 hour event today. I'll now pass on to Lynn O'Donnell, who will take things further. Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you, Noel. Thank you for your introduction and welcome everybody who's tuning in this evening, and welcome to you, Kay. Thank you so much for being here. You retired from the Navy with the rank of Commander. Why did you decide to leave and what did you take with you?
I think it was more a mutual decision of both the Navy and I, having been in for 28 years service, of which 24 I'd lived with a long-term medical condition. And it was really a decision that I'd got to the point that it probably wasn't good for my health to stay in. And although the Navy would have been very supportive, we both felt, both the medical board and myself felt that now was actually the time for me to move on before I made myself worse by pushing myself too hard. What have I taken away from the Navy? There's so much. It's changed so much really over the past 28 years. I joined in the early 90s as a student nurse, sort of quite rabbit in the headlights after, leaving college. I joined when women were first going to sea. We were only just allowed to stay in then if we got pregnant. So prior to sort of the entry that I was going through, if you got pregnant, you had to leave. You weren't given a choice. And now we're in a position where we've got women commanding warships, we've got women commanding, major units across the whole of the Royal Navy. We've got women able to serve on submarines in all roles. We've got women able to work in the Royal Marines. So there's a significant change. It's been a massive change. And I think across all of that, I think I've learned a lot about people, and I've taken away a lot about people and leadership styles.
I think that we're going to be putting people and your interaction with people at the core of our discussion this evening. But just to go back to your departure, your retirement from the Navy, the timing was really quite astounding. Lockdown, pandemic, the whole world was experiencing it in our own ways, in different ways, but experiencing the same thing nevertheless. How did that impact your transition, your a long career, retirement, bang, slap it into the middle of this astoundingly historic anthropological experience that we've all been through? How did that impact your, as I said, transition, and what lessons did you learn from it that you can pass on?
That actually had a massive impact on me. I was medically boarded in January last year, and I was due to leave the Navy in June 2020. So I went through the normal naval military career transition workshops and sat in one of my lectures teaching me how to write a CV and attend an interview and all of the things they do. And I had a phone call from an old work colleague who offered me a job. So I jumped at the chance and I thought, yeah, it saves me all the problem of going for interviews and making sure if my CV is all right. Nice job here, something that I would be interested in. And it was with the Association of Royal Navy Officers and the Royal Navy Officers Charity, which was, as I say, it was very much following on the lines from what I had learnt within my career in leadership and compassion. So I accepted the job and I went for my induction in London, and it was the same day that Boris Johnson announced that we were going to have to all start working from home. So the following day, my soon-to-be boss sent me home and said, I'll find a way to get a laptop to you. So I basically learnt the job myself at home, filling in lots of gaps where we were gapped staff, etc. And then the Navy decided to extend those of us that were being medically discharged because they didn't want to risk us leaving during a pandemic. And it was quite interesting. The Navy made that decision, but the Army and the RAF didn't. So that extended me through, and I actually left the Navy March this year, so just 4 weeks ago. But for the whole of that time, I was medically not employable by the Navy. So I've spent the past year just working as a volunteer for the organisation that now employs me. So I've spent a year as a volunteer working for a service charity and association. And it's been eye-opening.
Well, so it's an easier transition than it may otherwise have been, perhaps. Can you tell us a little about the new job?
So I'm working for a very small naval association and charity. Within the military charity sector, there are a lot of charities. We've heard of the big ones, SAFA, the British Legion. Most people now have heard of the Royal Navy Royal Marines charity, but there are actually 5 naval charities that sit together and work and operate together in conjunction to assess clients and those who might need our help. We're a charity that works purely on benevolence. So we're not the sort of charity that's going to be sending 20 tons of pizza to a ship on a Friday night, but we will be helping, Mrs. Smith, the widow of, retired Commander Smith, who may have fallen on hard times, or it may be a serving person who's maybe got a very sick child or needs some extra support financially or in other ways. And we are linked in with our association. So we're a membership organisation for the association. And we've got about 6,500 members, I think, at the moment. And that's either serving or retired naval or Royal Marines officers, Quorns officers, so that's the nursing service, their spouses, their widows, and also just people who have an interest in the Navy. We have, quite a few members who've just got that wider connection and want to be part of the association. So I'm the operations manager at the moment, and a lot of my role when I can get out is going to be going out and doing membership events and talking to people about the benefits of being a member.
Well, you were telling me as well that you're part of a new startup, TXNet. Because when you were telling me about it, you said there's so many different charities and organisations out there. Somebody comes out of the service and they can't find what it is that might suit them, so they start it up on their own, and there's a plethora. And TXNet, from what you told me, it sounds like it aims to be an umbrella, or at least connect those associations, so things are easier to find for people who are looking for support, post-career support. Is that correct? Have I got it right? Can you elaborate?
Yeah, so TXNet is just being set up, just being launched at the moment, and it's a digital platform to connect veterans and reservists between those who've got something and those who need something. And that could be anything. It can be as diverse as I'm looking for a holiday cottage in Cornwall to I'm looking for a job in Birmingham, or, I've got a flat that's available to rent in the Outer Hebrides, to, I can offer you career support in writing a CV. But it's allowing people to make those connections and to make those connections successful. And it's all online. It's not a social media platform. It is there purely for that. And equally, it's not a charity. It's been set up as a not-for-profit business because, as you say, there are so many charities out there. And I think it's the one thing that veterans find quite hard is they come out having been institutionalized in a service for many years, where quite often what we want is there in front of us, or the information is there. And we then come out into the civilian world, and I mean, I do joke about this, but there are so many small niche charities because somebody's come out and they've maybe applied to a charity for support, and they've either been turned down because they've not written it correctly, or they've gone to the wrong charity, but they then go and set something up for themselves, and we end up with a charity for retired majors in Norfolk who foster hedgehogs. But they can be really, really niche, because people think, well, I can't find anything else to support me, so I'll set it up myself. And so TXNet, in a way, is a way of networking all of those other networks to bring people in. Somebody says, oh, I need help with this. Oh, actually, why don't you go to so and so? Why don't you look at this? So hopefully it's that way of bringing people together. And with the Association of All Navy Officers and the Navy Officers Charity, hopefully my involvement with that means that people coming on board with naval issues, that I can point them then in the right direction and give them some guidance.
So TXNet is delineated into the services, into parts of each service. How is it broken up? How do I find what I need?
So it's a completely rank blind organisation, and it's also service blind. So it's open to everybody. The founders have been very clear about, first name terms, really. There's no rank or anything on there. And when we say there's no social media, it's a more inclusive environment. I think the one thing female veterans find when they leave is they really struggle to find somewhere that they are accepted, and that they're not expected to be one of the boys, because there's still quite a lot of individuals who have that sort of male banter that not everybody is comfortable with, and quite often they leave the services and they want to step away from that. So having something that's all inclusive, once you actually come onto the platform, you can look at then what area you want to look at. So do you want to look at employment, careers advice and training? Do you want to look at volunteering? And so there are subsections broken down that will allow you then to look at the various areas that you want to look at and support. So
how do we find it? txnet.com, txnet?
Yeah, so it's tx-net.co.uk, and if you Google TXNet, it normally comes up as the first one on the top there. And as I say, it's open to all veterans and reservists.
Well, the theme that we're talking to this evening is life after service. A lot of officers officers coming out of the military have done, as you did, decades of service, and they're leaving a career because there's nowhere else to go. Not enough positions for as many people as there are, and so it narrows as you go up the pyramid, as it were. But that's at a time of life, late 40s, early to mid 50s, when in any other career path, people would be reaching their most productive years, their highest earning potential, and suddenly they're out on their own. There's a little bit of, as we know, there's a little bit of help, the CV writing, the options, broad brush. What sort of challenges do you find, if we can talk about the officers first who have gone through that, what are the challenges? And you mentioned TXNet having specific areas for women. The challenges are different for men and women. What are the challenges and how do they differ for men and women? I guess that's what I'm asking.
I think what we have to understand is that everybody is different. So everybody is going to find those challenges differently. I think that when people leave service, they often struggle to translate those skills that they've developed in the armed forces into a civilianized CV. And they also struggle at times to present themselves at interview. But what many of them don't realise is actually all of the skills that they've developed in service are absolutely the ones that employers want, the core skills. It's very easy to learn how to do a new type of job, but actually that core person that you are is the bit that makes you employable. So the fact that you're reliable, that you turn up on time, that you're there to work, and that you've got the ability to communicate well, which the majority of the people in the armed forces have. We all get on and do well. There are some that struggle, and there will always be people that struggle in every walk of life. Sometimes that might be through physical health or the impact of mental health. That might be work related from the armed forces, but it might not be. And there are people across all walks of life with both, you know, gambling addictions, drug addictions, drinking addictions, and so people will always struggle in that environment to find necessarily the right support unless we catch them early.
Well, you mentioned a couple of times the health struggles that you have had. So if we can move on to, you know, maybe a bit more of a personal chat, can you elaborate on that? You've had ME, you said, for 25 years. 24 of your 25 years in the service. How did this come on, and how did it impact you? I mean, clearly you had a very successful career, so maybe the Royal Navy is a bit more benevolent than one would expect, but how did it impact you living with illness and subsequent disability?
So I've been in for 28 years. I was first ill in 1996. I got a virus. I'd worked at the Royal Tournament down at Earl's Court, and I'd come down with a horrendous chest virus. And after that, I fell ill with what we now know as ME. At the time, they sent me for lots of tests, and in those days, ME was still considered to be yuppie flu. A lot of people thought it was psychological. It was all in your head. You just had to work a little bit harder and push yourself, and you would be fine. Before I was ill, I was exceptionally fit, and I think after that first bout, when I was so poorly, I couldn't climb the stairs. I had to have my bed moved downstairs. It was really quite challenging. But I slowly recovered enough to be able to go back to work. And after that, I gradually built myself back to a level where I was fit enough to sort of do my fitness tests and do the things that were expected of people. And I was fine then for quite a long time. I had a mild case of ME, and I was lucky I could carry on. And then I had a relapse in around about 2007. I was working in a really intense work environment at the time. I had a young child, so my first child was born in 2005, and I was in a really, really busy job, and I think I didn't pace myself correctly. I didn't manage my condition as well as I could have done. So after that, I spent some time at Headley Court. Sorry, I've got to let the dog in. The children won't ignore the sign. Oh, well, sorry. She's outside crying. So I spent some time at Headley Court, which was the Defence Rehabilitation Centre, and I got, again, better. And I would say about 80% of what I was before. And at this point, I knew that I was struggling with my fitness for the Navy and managing it. But I managed to carry on. I did various jobs. You get to a point in your career and in your age where your fitness test is reduced. So from there, I was doing okay. And then there was an incident when I was working out in Gibraltar with one of the GPs that worked for me. And what I didn't realise at the time was that the impact of that on my mental health led to depression. So by the time I came back to the UK, as well as having my ME, I also had depression. I went into an exceptionally stressful job in a very emotive working environment for somebody who wasn't necessarily a great leader. And that put a huge pressure on me. And by 2018, my depression was so bad, it had impacted on my ME so much, I didn't leave the house for 4 months. I was signed off sick, and I was really very unwell. And it's at that point you find out who your friends are.
Yes. Yeah, indeed.
People who keep in touch, the people who phone or send an email or whatever and see how you are. Again, I went through some military rehab up at Stanford Hall, which is the new rehabilitation centre. And I kind of convinced myself I was well enough to come back to work. But I don't think I was. I went back to work in August 2019, and I managed till about the November. And by November, I thought, do you know what, this really isn't going to work. So again, I was off sick, and then they sent me to a medical board in the January, and that's when the decision was made that actually it was probably best for me to go. Yeah. So it was quite hard to live with, and for a long time I hid my illness because ME was classed as, you know, all in your head. It's just psychological. You just got to get on with it. And I was very frightened that, you know, I would lose my career earlier than I did, and I was determined I wasn't going to do that. So yeah, I did hide it for a long time, and it was only really, I suppose, around about 2017 that I actually came out with my illness and was public about it, a lot more than I was previously.
Well, you had a lot of support at home, didn't you? Stay-at-home hubby Neil. Can you tell us? And he raised the kids and started up a business as well. So a shameless plug for Explorers Coffee. Yeah, now Explorers Coffee. So tell us about that. The non-traditional roles that you both adopted and how that worked for you and how it continues to work.
So Neil's a veteran himself, so he left the army 16 years ago, and he left the army and decided he was going to run a pub, which he did for about 18 months, and then that kind of failed financially. So he did what every dutiful husband does and followed his wife around on her career. And when our eldest child was about 2.5, we decided the best thing for him to do was actually to stay at home and be a full-time parent. So he's done that for the past 12 years. Our second child came along in 2010, just as he thought he was going to go back to work, but he didn't. So about 3 years ago, the eldest was obviously a lot more independent. The youngest was full-time education. So we decided that he wanted to do something, and he kind of fell into the coffee business by accident, really. He started working for somebody whose business failed, and he said, well, actually, I could probably do this myself. So he set up Explorer Coffees. We've been trading now for about 2.5 years. So that's another one to add to my CV of company director. We're just in the process of looking for some commercial property to run from in the local area. So he manages that all from home. The coffee roaster's in the garage. He does all of the prep and the packing in our kitchen. His office is the top stairs landing.
You import the beans and roast them yourself and sell them by the kilo, the half kilo.
Yeah, so we don't import the beans. There's only 3 importers into the UK, and we get our beans from one of those. So we get the green beans. Neil either roasts them as a single origin, or he's got 4 particular blends of his own that he roasts. And then, yes, they're all packaged here. We send them out either as beans or ground coffee. We've got tea, we've got hot chocolate, and we've just expanded as well into active wear and also travel luggage.
Okay.
In his wisdom. And he did that just before we all went into lockdown. So yeah, the get outside hashtag and follow the compass didn't work very well during lockdown.
Wonderful. Well, let's take a question while we can, Kay. Let me see, Janet Berridge, you've got a question. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question to Kay?
Yes, thank you very much, Lynn. Kay, that was very interesting, and I really salute what you've achieved despite your illness. Some years ago, I was a prison visitor in the southeast of England, in Canterbury actually, and I remember going to visit quite a few inmates who, after chatting to them, I found out they were veterans, and they had not coped with coming back into civilian life at all well. And I got the impression then, I mean, there was actually a barracks in Canterbury. So we saw a lot of military personnel. And I got the feeling that the armed forces they hadn't at that time, this was sort of in the noughties, they hadn't really taken this up and they hadn't taken it on board, that it's a bit like being at, I suppose, at school, in a boarding school where everything's done for you, and then suddenly you're out on your own and you've got to sort of relearn how to live independently. And some of these men I was visiting in those days, they just didn't get it. In some cases, of course, there was a marriage breakup or something, and they suddenly found themselves on the streets, and then one thing led to another, and you know, a bit of crime came into it, and they were up in front of a court, and I felt so sorry for them. Do you think that the armed forces have recognised that more, and that they are doing more to help people when they come out?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an issue that's been going on for a while, and it's not just within the prison system. It's also within the standard criminal system with the police. And what we find now is a lot of the police agencies have got a military liaison or a veterans coordinator. So if somebody, right from that point of either interview or arrest, if they indicate that they're a veteran, they're referred through to the veterans coordinator, who can then start getting them support straight away. So if it's maybe theft because they're homeless and or drugs or something along those lines, then there are various support structures in place that can actually help them at those early stages. Once individuals then go into the prison system, then again there's coordinators now, and there's a couple of specialist charities where I talked earlier, I joked about the niche charities. There are some very good niche charities. There's one called Care After Combat, which specifically provides therapy for veterans with addiction problems that are in prison. So we do have a much better relationship, and I know the Office of Veterans Affairs at the moment is doing a lot of work on how best to support the diverse spectrum of veterans that we've got. So those that maybe are within the criminal justice system, those that are disabled, those that are within the LGBT community, women, etc. So that, you know, they're recognising that a veteran isn't just one specific person or type of person.
Thank you.
Does that help?
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you.
Indeed. Thanks, Kay, and thanks for your question, Janet. Noel would like to ask you a question. Kay, are you there, Noel? Unmute yourself.
Thank you, Lynn. Kay, I have to just first say a big thank you, because you volunteered to do this the very first month the circle was created. So you've been very patient to come and play in our space. But I found you through the quarterdeck talks, and I'm thinking that sort of getting together of service people who are in the job for really interesting and informative discussions, and also thinking about new ideas, is that something that they can often lose once they leave service? It's like a cliff edge. You're in a very busy, integrated environment, and you did use the word institution, and I can understand that. But is it possible that they also lose connections very, very quickly? So I'd be interested in your perspective.
Yeah, so just a bit of background for everyone else. When I was in service, a group of friends and I set up something called the Quarterdeck Talks, based down in Portsmouth, as a way of meeting up on a monthly basis, having a presentation on some sort of military history or military current studies. And then we would do a bit of networking in the bar afterwards. And we started off as a group of about a dozen, and before lockdown, we were about 40 at our last meeting. So quite similar to the circle that you've got here. And it was a really good way of bringing people together. And we had serving personnel, we had retired personnel, we had members of the local community with military connections. And I agree. I think that camaraderie that you have in service and that link is very much missed by some people. And I think that's where something like the Association of Navy Officers comes into effect, because we deliver that wider social structure for people and allow them to get on and still be together. Now, normally we'd do that through events. So we used to have church services and dinners and garden parties with, you know, invites to Buckingham Palace and all of that. But again, lockdown prevented us from doing that. So I set up this time last year, I set up a talk series for Arno members once a month. We also have, on a Friday evening, we have something called Sundowners. So anybody who's ex-military will understand Sundowners. It's standing on the bridge wing at 6 o'clock in the evening, and, you know, having an orange juice or a gin and tonic or whatever is your tipple, and just socialising. And then on the alternate weeks, we do a quiz for them. And then we've also got something called Arno Skillshare, where they can talk about something they know about. So we've had a weather presentation, we've had embroidery for mariners, beekeeping, and I think next month is glass engraving. So, you know, they love getting together and having a chat and being sociable. And I think the more we can encourage veterans into that sort of organisation and space afterwards, the more we can continue to support them.
So yes, thanks, Kay. It's not so much a deinstitutionalisation, is it? It's allowing people to reinstitutionalise when it suits them and as they need, I guess. Yeah. Well, I hope whatever's happened to, you know, the loss of that over lockdown is picked up again. And I know the Veterans Affairs Office is doing a lot to make sure that there's a diverse range of services for the diverse needs that exist. I'm going to go now to Dr. Steve Price. If you're there and you can hear me, please unmute yourself and ask your question. Steve, there you are.
Hi, my name's Steve. I was a seaman officer, mine warfare, during the Cold War in the Royal Naval Reserve. Left the service in '94 when we lost our squadron. I'm now a trauma-informed clinical hypnotherapist, having been through my own issues. And I'm group owner of Royal Navy Resettlement on LinkedIn. So I continue to identify as Royal Navy. But my question relates to the sort of self-image questions that people are confronted with when they've left. In many instances, they find that they're not really sure who they are anymore. And my question relates to the idea that there is a kind of hierarchy of need, as Maslow might put it, that relates specifically to veterans. And it occurred to me to wonder if there was a kind of triage system where you might find a way of identifying people who might have quite severe or quite complex needs, as opposed to those who would rapidly reintegrate. And I'm thinking about people who may have been in toe-to-toe combat, say from the Marines, as opposed to somebody who might have been in some other part of the service that was, as it were, less highly charged. Yeah. So, and if we can identify that kind of hierarchy, and that the signposting to resources was available, could they then have a mentor, a trained mentor that would help them to sort of follow through and mirror back to them how they're getting on?
Yeah, so there is already so somebody who's leaving the service with complex needs, whatever those complex needs might be, and I am going to talk only from naval experience here, because I think I wouldn't want to speak for the other two services. There are some structures in place. So if you're in the medical margin, then you have a separate divisional support structure. And that will help facilitate you out into the resettlement programme. And the resettlement programme now is quite comprehensive. So you get the housing review, you get a financial review, you get your career support from CTP. And if you are identified by your resettlement officer as actually needing a bit more support, they can do that. And we do have close links in with family services now, and I've known some complex cases recently come out through that. For those that have had that, as you say, toe-to-toe combat experience, you've got to, in some respects, divide that into two categories. Those that have got an identified need before they leave service, whether that's medical health or mental health, and those that have not got an identified need. So those that have an identified need and are already in a care pathway, there are some clear support structures already in place. And Portsmouth is a prime example at the moment. They've just had some extra funding for a trial to enhance the TILS service here, and that's the transition in life service. So that's for those who are under mental health care in service, they get an immediate referral into the NHS. So I was referred 3 weeks ago, my appointment's next week. So it's a very swift system, and they've got extra funding down here with Solent Mind, and that's going to expand across the country. When it comes to physical health, that transition into the NHS system again has been refined. It still has a lot of work to do. If you go to a GP in an area that's got a high military community, they have got an understanding. But if you end up with a GP in Chipping Sodbury and you're their only veteran, they probably don't know how to refer you, and that's work that I think still needs to be developed. Outside of that, those that maybe don't have an identified need, there are more services setting up now through sort of veterans outreach support in various areas that can help. There are things, for example, I know Abby Pearce is on the call tonight. Abby is part of something called the Southwest Leavers Link. And the Leavers Link UK helps support those who are leaving into that transition, and to give them support and advice where they need it from a career perspective as well. So I think that it's not fixed. There's a lot of work to do, but I think the work is being done, and it's been identified where a lot of these gaps are. There's a new policy across the armed forces that they want people to leave well. And I know the Navy have just employed a new desk officer to help that transition resettlement piece out. But there are some people, you know, I've got a friend, Joe, who lives just up the road, who's been transitioning out of the Navy now for nearly 4 years because he's got complex PTSD. And actually they said, we will keep you in. He hasn't worked for 4 years. He's actually a Royal Marine, but they have supported him all the way through in making sure his house has been adapted, making sure he's got the right mental health support, making sure his family is supported. And then the Royal Marines charity have perhaps absolutely stood right up for him and helped him find a job, and a job that's appropriate for him and what he's able to do. So for those that ask for help, the help is there. The problem is that not everybody knows they need help, and not everybody asks for help.
I'll just answer that by saying you use the term ending up. And I think that ending up is when you sort of get to the end of a certain pathway and you give up in frustration.
Okay.
The NHS, I'm afraid, is not a panacea and doesn't, as you correctly point out, fully understand the service mindset. Certainly the Royal Naval Reserve is overlooked because people, I think, say, well, they're half civvy anyway. Why would they need to transition out of the Navy if they've got one foot in a completely different bucket? But that doesn't.
Okay, if you don't mind, I'll have to interrupt you because we do have some people waiting to ask their own questions. But thank you very much for participating. Great question and great answer. That one could go on for a long time, I think. Yeah. But I'll throw over now to Nicola Williams. You have a question for Kay. Nicola, unmute yourself and ask away.
Yes. Hello, Kay. Can you hear me?
I can. Hello, Nicola.
Hi. Well, first of all, can I say, at the risk of sounding a bit fangirlish, I was very, very impressed with what you said, particularly with regards to you suffering from ME for such a long period of time, contingent with your service, and still making commander. That is no easy task at all. And then when you overlay that with depression for at least a part of that time, that was really tremendous. And you might be too modest to acknowledge how tremendous that is. But for my work as the former service complaints ombudsman, I know all too well just how amazing that is.
I thought I recognised your name.
Thank you. I have a comment and then two questions, and I think that they're probably quite linked. The first comment, I think, is I totally agree with you about a sort of multiplicity of service charities, and there might be all sorts of good reasons for that, but I personally think a lot of them are too niche, and it'd be better if they all were more sort of aligned, if you like. And the second thing is that female veterans do struggle to be accepted in veteran spaces for banter and all sorts of other, you know, if you leave, maybe not because of banter, but if you don't want to be around a very sort of overly male, super macho environment as a veteran, and then you come into that's not so great. I know that Salute Her does a lot of stuff for women veterans, particularly with forward assist. And I'm so happy that TX Next is going to be a very integrated kind of veterans charity. But I wish that when I was the Ombudsman, and I had actually said that before the HCDC, that I would have liked our remit extended to deal with veterans' complaints, because I do believe sometimes people don't think about complaining about something about which they could complain until they leave. Yeah. So, you know, they didn't agree with that. I think maybe in time that's coming. But my questions, first of all, women in ground close combat. I know you've had this one before. And first of all, women have been in ground close. If you've been a medic, you've been in ground close combat. And I think sometimes people forget that. But if we're talking about, say, a Marine or an infantry or something, have you seen anybody come to your organization as a result of being a woman in ground close combat? And has that led to any sort of complaints or any issues, or do you see that it could? That's the first question. And secondly, with regards to mental health in its broadest possible sense, do you believe, particularly with your issue with depression as well, do you believe that it's hard to sort of complain, not just about that, but with your ME as well, in sense of a hidden health issue? Do you believe that it's hard to be in the service with a hidden health issue, or did you feel that you were well supported?
Okay, so the first question first, the ground close combat. I actually have had very little to do with that. So the areas that I worked in, I was predominantly medical operational planning and capability development, and most of that within the naval aspect. Our women have been at sea doing all roles for over 20 years. Sorry, my husband's mowing. So from that perspective, I've always seen women in frontline roles, because, you know, women have been serving at sea. And actually, you know, our female medics, as you say, have been serving in the front line in Afghanistan for a very long time. So I think women in ground close combat, I think, is something that people want to make an issue of when it doesn't necessarily need to be an issue. Mm-hmm. We need to ensure that uniforms and equipment are adapted for different body types, not just a male versus female body types, but short people, tall people, slim people. We need to make sure that our equipment is good quality and it fits people so that they can do their job. And actually, when you do that, then you take away a lot of the barriers, because, you know, saying that somebody's rucksack is too heavy at 60 kilos, well, why are we asking anybody to carry 60 kilos? That's not healthy for a, you know, a 5'5" slim male, as it is for maybe a 6 foot tall, you know, 14 stone female who might be a, you know, a female rugby player. You know, why should she not be able to do that when, you know, he's got to carry it? So from my perspective, it's only my personal view on women in ground close combat. Looking at that wider hidden disability piece, it's something I did some work in just before I left the service. So when I talked earlier about coming out about my ME, I did that after I'd been asked to be an ally for our LGBT community back in 2016. And it was at the time I became public with who I was on Twitter. I got rid of my anonymous account and my anonymous name. And I felt very much that if I was going to be an ally, I had to be willing to stand by my views and my principles. And I learned, I had a very good mentor, a trans woman who's an exceptionally good friend now, who really helped me to understand that whole bringing your whole self to work piece, that you've not got something to hide. And that gave me the confidence to come out and be open about my ME and the impact that it had on my life, and how my life actually was very different to others. And you only see this image. It's like a Zoom. You only see this little square bit of me. You don't see everything else that goes on. And I think if I had been more open about my ME sooner, I think the impact of the depression may have been less, because, as I say, one of the bosses that I was working for wasn't a particularly good leader, and had very little compassion. And I think compassion is very important to us when we're working with people. We've got to be compassionate to ourselves, And that's the one thing we all fail on. We don't step back and look after ourselves, and we need to, because if we don't look after ourselves, we can't look after other people and be compassionate for other people. So I started working alongside one of my colleagues and friends, a lady called Rebecca Fines, and Rebecca became the carers advocate for the Royal Navy for Rear Admiral Marshall, and I was asked to step up and be the patient's advocate, patient's voice really, for him at the Armed Forces Chronic Illness and Disability in Defence Network. And we did that, and we did quite a bit of work alongside Mandy Islam before she sadly passed away. And then last year we ran the first Royal Navy Disability Conference, concurrent to the Royal Navy's Neurodiversity Network launch. So there's now a lot more people willing to talk about having an invisible illness and living with it at work, or being a carer. You know, there's so many of our serving personnel who are carers. So Rebecca's eldest son, Sebi, has Down syndrome. And, you know, people don't see that unless she tells them. So they don't know about the sleepless nights, or the fact that he's not feeding, or the fact that, you know, he needs multiple changes. And a lot of people do that. They hide what actually they should possibly be a bit more public about, so people can have a little bit more compassion for them. But there are still leaders that don't have compassion, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Thank you.
Probably. Thank you so much, Nicola. It's lovely to see you here. Thanks for your question. You know, very fine points. And the leave well, I hope that takes hold, because leave well in itself is an implication of compassion, isn't it? And needed across the board. My 2 cents. Anyway, let's go to the next question. And thank you again, Nicola. Carol Berliner, are you there? Can you unmute yourself and ask Kay your question, please?
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you, Kay, for a very enlightening presentation. Thank you so much for being as open as you have been. I wanted to know, are the challenges faced by long-term service personnel also reflected by those who have served as reservists? I'm thinking about the context where one day you're terribly busy in the midst of your reservist service, and then the next it stops. So I'm just interested to know whether you've had experience in that reservist milieu. Thank you.
So I've worked with a lot of reservists, a lot of our medical personnel that help support the Role 3 afloat and the Role 2 deployed medical capabilities are reservists. So I've worked a lot with them, and actually a lot of my close friends are naval reservists. And yes, absolutely. You find that people go from what may be their full-time day job to maybe being deployed for 6 months on a ship, carrying out their reservist role, and then coming back to their regular job. And it's quite interesting. And I see Steve's just put the piece there about cognitive dissonance, if I can say it, is that what somebody's role might be in the Royal Navy Reserve might be completely different to what their role is in civilian life. I have a good friend who's a police constable in real life, but actually in the reserves, they're a lieutenant. And they've got that promotion. They were originally a rating and have been through Dartmouth and got their promotion from there. But actually then you compare that to their role in civilian life, and it's completely different, although there is some overlap. We also get quite a few people now who take up full-time reservist service. The Navy started something called Project Firefly, I think it was called, which allows people to move between the regular and the reservist space quite easily. So, for example, if you get to a point in your career, maybe where your spouse is deployed, and you want to ensure that you're in a fixed location so you can provide childcare support for the next 2 years, you could opt to do a reservist, full-time reservist home commitment only post for 2 years, and then slide back into the regular service at the end of that 2-year period without having lost any rank or rate or time in service. And people are doing that. So I've got quite a few friends and colleagues that have left regular service after 30 plus years and have gone straight into FTRS jobs, so that they've continued in that full-time regular service as opposed to going to find a civilian job. And they're kind of using those as a top-up between then and actually retiring proper. So I think there is a lot more understanding of what reservists do nowadays. I know Commodore Maritime Reserves is very, very keen to make sure that the reservists remain high profile and that they are in all jobs that they can be. So I think there was some dissonance in the past, some cognitive dissonance in the past. I think reservists find it as challenging as regulars when they lose that camaraderie, that role, that almost that title of this is who you are. And I think that's challenging for everybody, yes. So I think there is a lot of commonality there.
Terrific. Thank you, Kay. Can we hear now, please, from Lieutenant Commander Manish Tile? Can you unmute yourself, Manish, and ask your question to Kay? You have to unmute yourself. Not hearing from you. Okay, well, let's jump to Brian Williams while we see if we can find the Lieutenant Commander. Brian, are you there with your question?
Yes, I am. Hi, Kay. I've listened to what you've said, and I wish that what you've spoken about was a uniquely UK problem. Unfortunately, it's not. We have the same problem in Australia. Our government's had an epiphany in the last few hours and realised that PTSD is actually a big problem with veterans, and the unfortunately lethal outcome that's coming from that. So they've decided to have a Royal Commission to find out, well, why is that happening? And I think probably what I found from my experience, having been in the service and transitioning into the corporate world, is how do you go from an organisation where people are honest with you, they're upfront with you, and you go into the corporate world where in many cases you're going into a nest of vipers. And one of the things we certainly do here is a lot of mentoring of people who've been in the corporate world for a while, helping people do that transition so that they can actually survive in the corporate world and have those choices so they can continue on their careers, because they have some great skills. And a lot of time it's helping them understand, well, what is the value of those skills and how can they actually maximize that value going forward for the rest of their careers? I mean, you wear DPUs for the first half of your life, and the other half you're wearing a suit. But it's still what's the maximum value you can get out of it, and have that quality of life you want to go for going forward.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There is this is global. Those that know me know I spend a lot of time on social media, on Twitter, and I see colleagues from the American Army and services, the Canadians, the Australians, and across the globe, that actually a lot of the issues that we have here, people have everywhere else as well. So that's, you know, veterans being able to resettle into society. That's the same type of individuals who tend to dominate the veteran space publicly, that is not necessarily the voice for all. You know, we're an organisation that takes people from every walk of life, every gender now, and every sexuality, and it's such a wide scope that actually we need to make sure that when we look at support for veterans, at the moment we're very much focusing on as I say, that standard, you know, a white male, and actually we need to be looking outside of those boundaries. You know, how do we support the disabled veteran community? How to support female veteran community? How do we support those maybe from the Commonwealth network? You know, we look at the Gurkha community and the amount of effort that had to go into providing support for them to gain citizenship. There's a whole raft of issues out there, and you know, it's something that maybe we should all be working together across the globe to say, right, how have you dealt with this?
Indeed. Thanks, Brian.
Completely agree.
Thanks, Kate. If we can track down Manish, can you are you there, Manish? Are you still able to unmute perhaps and ask Kay your question? No, perhaps not. Perhaps not. Oh, that's a pity. I think that's all we really have time for. So keeping it very tight. Kay, thank you so much for your time and your comments and your discourse. It's been a joy to have you. I'm going to throw us over to Ashley for the vote of thanks and some housekeeping, and I will say to you thank you and goodbye. Thank you, and good night. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Kay, on behalf of the NLC, I really want to thank you for your presentation today. What struck me in your presentation is how very open you've been on a subject that is still very, very difficult to talk about. The pandemic has brought forward the topic of mental health issue in ways that we haven't seen before. It's been thrown about, just all over the place. But the truth is, dealing with it is another matter. And I'm very thankful for your words and for the solutions also that you brought today. I keep in mind the fact that you mentioned the fact that getting support and mentors is one of the decisive things that truly help in dealing with this. So thank you, thanks a lot. And to all the members of the NLC, the next meeting of the Defence and Security Circle is going to take place on the 3rd of June. So please pencil this date, and thank you again for your presence, and see you very soon at the club.